We'd like to welcome you all here. I'd also like to welcome those on the internet. Seems to be picking up on traffic and viewers, listeners. So it's a blessing. Our DVD continues to grow as well, and we continue to do MP3s. So welcome to all those who are listening or who may be listening down the road. For we all here are familiar with Christmas and Halloween and Easter, many of the days that this world observes, but some of us aren't so familiar with Valentine's Day. This day, surprisingly, has a dark history, like the other days we're familiar with. And yet the world, as it does with Christmas and Halloween and the other days, ignores the truth of history. And it's not easy, or it's not hard to prove. Very easy to prove the etymology, the roots of Valentine and where it was derived from. I'd like to begin with the History Channel, believe it or not. There was a show, Christmas Unwrapped, years ago. A great show. History Channel produced it. It's a lot of truth, surprisingly, from the History Channel. And doing some research, I found probably the best synopsis, if you will, of what occurred during this Roman celebration where we derived Valentine's Day from the History Channel. But here's what it says. Quote, while some believe that Valentine's Day is celebrated in the middle of February to commemorate the anniversary of Valentine's death or burial, there were three men, by the way, three popes with the name Valentine. Most Catholics will say this is where this derives from. But here we find which probably occurred around 270 AD. Others claim that the Christian church may have decided to celebrate Valentine's Day, feast day, in the middle of February in an effort to, quote, Christianize. Find that ironic, Christianize celebrations of the pagan Lupercalia festival. In ancient Rome, now listen to what it says here, February was the official beginning of spring. So here in about a month, we would be in the beginning of spring, according to the Roman calendar, and was considered a time for purification. Houses were ritually cleansed by sweeping them out and then sprinkling salt and a type of wheat called spelt throughout their interiors. Lupercalia, which began at the idols of February 15th, keep that in mind, was a fertility festival dedicated to Faunus, the Roman god of agriculture, as well to the Roman founders, Romulus and Remus. Now, Romulus and Remus was the supposed founders of Rome. We find that in the historical documents of Rome. So we find that this festival was dedicated to Faunus, which again is the same deity as Pan, which we will find in just a moment, but it was the god of agriculture, fertility. And it was also a celebration to commemorate Romulus and Remus. The Luperci, an order of Roman priests, would gather at the sacred cave where the infants Romulus and Remus, the founders of Rome, were believed to have been cared for by a she-wolf or lupa. Lupa means wolf. The priest would then sacrifice a goat for fertility, now notice this, and a dog for purification. The boys then sliced the goat's hide into stripes, dipped them in the sacrificial blood, and took to the streets, gently slapping both women in fields of crops with the goat hide stripes. Far from being fearful, women welcomed being touched with the hides because it was believed the stripes would make them more fertile in the coming year. Again, everything we find here. Later in the day, according to legend, all the young women in the city would place their names in a big urn. You wonder where we get Valentine cards from. Here's probably where it derived from. The city's bachelors would then each choose a name out of the urn and become paired for the year with his chosen woman. These matches often ended in marriage. Pope Gelasius declared February 14th St. Valentine's Day around 498 AD. So we find that this day is really a fertility celebration for both crops and women, that they would prefer that they were slapped with this sacrificial blood. And this is where we receive Valentine's Day. One more, or a few more sources here. This is from the Funk and Wacko New Encyclopedia of St. Valentine's Day. It says it is celebrated February 14th by the custom of sending greeting cards or gifts to express affection. The cards, known as Valentines, are often designed with hearts to symbolize love. The holiday probably derives from the ancient Roman feast of Lupercilius, February 15th. The festival gradually became associated with the feast day, February 14th, of two Roman martyrs, both named Saint Valentine, who lived in the 3rd century. So we find again that it was only later that the church synchronized, synchronism again, where you're blending different faiths. They blended what we find with Lupercilia with this Saint Valentine, honoring the supposed patron of or pope of love. And we can, it's another study all to its own. World Book Encyclopedia says this on Valentine's Day. It says, quote, "The customs of the day have nothing to do with the lives of the saints." Or here we finally have an honest reference here. They probably come from an ancient Roman festival called Lupercilia, which took place every February 15th. The festival honored Juno, the Roman goddess of women and marriage. And Pan, by the way, is the same god as Faunus, the god of nature. The Romans celebrated their feast of Lupercilia as a lover's festival for young people. Young men and women chose partners for the festival by drawing names from a box. After the spread of Christianity, churchmen tried to give Christian meaning to the pagan festival. So we find the same history repeating itself time and time again. During this time, the church was trying to bring in pagans. To accomplish this, they would often synchronize or blend religions. And that's what we find here in 496. Pope Gelasius changed the Lupercilia festival of February 15th to St. Valentine's Day, February 14th. But the sentimental meaning of the old festival has remained to the present time. Historians disagree about the identity of St. Valentine. Furthermore, it also states Lupercilia was celebrated on February 15th in honor of Faunus, a rural Italian god. Faunus was later identified with Pan, the god of herds and fertility. So we find in this quote where the true roots of Valentine are found. And we find that this day does not have its history in the Roman Pope Valentine, or Saint Valentine as they refer to him as, but we find that this goes all the way back to a Roman pagan festival which worshipped and was for the purpose of fertility, for crops and for people, so that that next year they would be fertile, be able to produce crops, and be able to bear children. This was an important aspect of pagan religion. We find this with so many of their deities and so many of their different celebrations. We find it goes back to fertility. This, whether it's Ashtoreth, which we will look at later, is an amazing parallel to what we find with Lupercus or Faunus or Pan, whatever you want to call it. They received different names depending on the nation who observed these days. But they're the same festival, same meaning, same purpose, to worship fertility. Took some quotes here. One was from yourdictionary.com on the definition of Lupercilia. It defines this as an ancient Roman festival with fertility rites held February 15th in honor of Lupercus. Again, the deity was Lupercus, a pastoral god, sometimes identified with Faunus. All types of different names for these deities. The etymology is interesting here. Lupercus comes from lupus and means a wolf. Now remember that the founders of Rome, which was Romulus and Remus, were raised by a she-wolf. So we find that this Lupercus or lupus goes all the way back to the founders of Rome and was eventually turned into a festival honoring and celebrating fertility.